The metallic sound of chains dragging heavy equipment through the silent night in Millbrook, Idaho. William Harris, 52, watched helplessly from the window of his century-old home as a team of uniformed men removed his precious farm equipment under the artificial light of powerful spotlights. At the head of the group, Richard Moore, president of the Homeowners Association of the newly built Golden Valley Estates, supervised the operation with a barely concealed smile of satisfaction. "This is completely illegal," William shouted, descending the steps of his balcony in heavy steps. His work-worn boots left deep marks in the damp soil. "You have no right to touch any of my equipment." Richard Moore, 45, dressed in an impeccable suit even at that time of night, adjusted his expensive tie before replying with a condescending tone. "Mr. Harris, we sent out multiple notices about the noise violations. The council voted unanimously to seize the equipment until you comply with our coexistence guidelines. The Harris's farm existed long before the luxurious Golden Valley Estates condominium was even imagined. For 3 generations, the family farmed that land, starting with William's grandfather, who arrived in Idaho during the Great Depression with just a mule and a plow. Now, a decade after his father's death, William was keeping the family legacy alive, producing organic food that supplied not only local markets, but also hospitals and schools in the region. Coexistence guidelines. William ran a hand through his gray hair, trying to contain his indignation. "My family has been farming this land for almost a century. You arrived less than 2 years ago and you think you can dictate the rules." Jessica Martinez, William's lawyer and longtime friend, arrived on the scene just then, her car skidding slightly on the dirt road. "Stop this removal immediately," she ordered, her document folder in one hand and her cell phone recording in the other. "You have no legal authority for this." Richard Moore just smiled, pulling a document out of his inside jacket pocket. "Actually, we do. As you can see, the town hall has endorsed our petition on noise levels. More importantly, we discovered that some of your equipment is parked in an area that technically belongs to the condominium." William felt his blood run cold. Years ago, there had been a dispute over the exact boundaries of his property, but the issue had been resolved in his favor. Or so he thought. "This is ridiculous," Jessica interjected, quickly examining the documents under the light of her cell phone. "These demarcations have been altered. I can clearly see that the records have been manipulated." But the men continued their work, loading tractors and agricultural implements onto large trucks. Each piece of equipment represented not only a substantial financial investment, but years of hard work and savings. "You don't understand," William tried to explain, his voice laced with emotion. "I have contracts with local hospitals. People depend on the food I produce. Without this equipment, I can't maintain production." "Well, maybe it's time to consider selling your property," Richard suggested with false sympathy. "Golden Valley Estates would be happy to make a fair offer. After all, this valley deserves a proper golf course, don't you think?" The mention of selling made William clench his fists. The estate wasn't just a piece of land, it was his heritage, his history, his purpose. The memories of his father and grandfather were ingrained in every acre of that soil. Jessica put a comforting hand on William's shoulder. "We're going to fight this, Will. They may have money and influence, but we have the law and justice on our side." As the last of the equipment was removed, William watched the horizon where the lights of the Golden Valley condominium shone like an artificial constellation. The contrast between his traditional way of life and the invasive modernity of the condominium had never seemed so stark. "You have 48 hours to submit a plan to comply with our standards," Richard announced, already heading for his Tesla Model X parked nearby. "Otherwise, your equipment will be auctioned off to cover the fines you've accumulated." As the trucks drove off, leaving only deep marks in the farm soil, William stood motionless, gazing at the empty shed where his equipment used to be. Jessica was already on the phone, contacting other local lawyers and activists who could help. "We'll file an injunction first thing tomorrow," she assured him. "And I'm going to expose this manipulation of property records." Richard Moore may have bought off a few people at City Hall, but he can't buy off the entire court system, William nodded silently, his mind already calculating how long his crops would survive without proper care. Every hour lost meant a greater risk of losing the entire crop. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It was the time when William would normally begin his work on the land. But that morning, for the first time in decades, the Harris farm would remain silent. However, as he watched the sunrise, William made a silent promise to his ancestors. This land would continue to produce food. It would continue to sustain lives. It would continue to be a Harris farm, even if he had to fight the entire Golden Valley estates. The morning after the confiscation, William Harris found his kitchen occupied by a determined group. Jessica Martinez had summoned a small support team, including Marcus Chen, an expert in environmental law, and Diana O'Connor, an investigative reporter for the Idaho Herald. The aroma of strong coffee filled the room as they examined documents spread out on the antique oak table. "I found something interesting," Diana announced, adjusting her red-framed glasses. "Richard Moore has a questionable record in other states. Before moving to Idaho, he faced lawsuits in Oregon and Washington for similar real estate intimidation practices." William, who had barely slept, lifted his head from his own research. "How did he manage to establish a position of authority here with that track record?" "Money buys a lot of smiles and handshakes," Marcus commented, typing furiously on his laptop. "But I also found something peculiar in the environmental records. Golden Valley Estates was built on a groundwater conservation area. The building permits seem dubious." Jessica was organizing a timeline of events on a makeshift board. "Will, you mentioned an old dispute about the boundaries of the property. Do you have the original documents?" William went to the office, returning with a worn folder. "My father kept everything. He said we might need it one day." While they were examining the documents, a firm knock sounded on the front door. It was Catherine Wells, a 68-year-old neighboring farmer carrying a basket of homemade bread and a determined expression. "I heard about what happened," she said, placing the basket on the table. "I've brought reinforcements." Behind her, a line of pickup trucks began to park on the Harris estate. Local farmers, some of whom were William's direct competitors, climbed out of the vehicles carrying tools and equipment. "We can't let you lose the crop, Harris," declared Bob Turner, a dairy farmer from the neighboring county. "We brought our spare equipment. They're not as new as yours, but they'll do until we sort this situation out." William felt a lump in his throat. The solidarity of the rural community was something that Richard Moore, with all his money, would never understand. Diana captured everything in her notebook. That's journalistic gold, the community uniting against corporate tyranny. But the morning of hope was interrupted by the sound of sirens. 3 local police cars were approaching the estate, followed by Richard Moore's Tesla. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced through a megaphone, "you are in violation of a restraining order on agricultural activities on this property. Disperse immediately." Jessica ran out onto the porch, papers in hand. "What restraining order? We haven't been served with any court order." Richard smiled his characteristic smile, handing more papers to the local sheriff. "Signed by Judge Peterson an hour ago. Apparently, Mr. Harris's activities pose an environmental risk to our planned community." Marcus Chen immediately recognized the name. Peterson, the same judge who approved the questionable condominium permits. Diana discreetly photographed the scene with her cell phone, while Catherine Wells positioned herself firmly at William's side. "This is pure intimidation," Catherine declared. "You can't stop a man from working on his own land." Sheriff Thompson, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, approached the group. "I'm sorry, folks, but I need to do my job. Please remove the equipment from the property." Jessica quickly intervened. "Sheriff, I have evidence here of manipulation of property records. Do you really want to be an accomplice to fraud?" The tension in the air was palpable. The farmers refused to move their equipment, forming a human barrier. Richard Moore was beginning to lose his polished composure. "You don't understand," he vociferated. This valley has the potential to become Idaho's next luxury destination. I'm not going to let a bunch of rednecks ruin my investments." The comment provoked indignant murmurs among those present. Diana smiled, knowing that she had just landed a perfect quote for her story. Just then, a new vehicle arrived at the estate. It was an official SUV from the State Department of Agriculture. A tall, middle-aged woman got out of the car with a folder of documents. "I'm Rachel Henderson, Regional Supervisor," she introduced herself. "I've received reports of possible sabotage of an essential agricultural operation. The local hospitals have warned us about the risk of shortages." Richard tried to intervene, but Rachel ignored him completely. "Mr. Harris, your farm is registered as a critical supplier of organic products to healthcare institutions. Any interference with your operation needs to go through state review." Jessica couldn't hold back a smile. "What about Judge Peterson's order?" "Municipal orders don't override state food safety issues," Rachel replied dryly. "Sheriff Thompson, I suggest you direct your men to stand down until a proper investigation is conducted." The sheriff seemed relieved to have an honorable way out of the situation. Richard Moore, on the other hand, was shaking with anger. "This isn't over," he threatened, getting into his Tesla. "You have no idea of the power you're up against." As the vehicles pulled away, the community present began to organize a work plan with the borrowed equipment. Catherine Wells was already coordinating groups for different tasks, her decades of experience in the field evident in the efficiency of her instructions. "Will," Jessica called softly, "we found something in the old documents that you need to see. Something about the region's water rights." William looked at his land, at the friends and neighbors who had mobilized to help him, and at the folder Jessica held. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the confiscation, he felt he had a real chance of winning. Rachel Henderson approached the group on the balcony. "Mr. Harris, we need to talk about some irregularities we found in the Golden Valley Estate's records. Something tells me that Mr. Moore didn't count on a state investigation into his business." William nodded, determined. The war had just begun, and now he was no longer fighting alone. An anonymous brown envelope arrived in the Idaho Herald newsroom the next morning, addressed to Diana O'Connor. Inside, detailed financial documents revealed an intricate web of transactions between Golden Valley Estates and various shell companies. Diana immediately recognized a familiar pattern in her investigation into Richard Moore. "We need more," she muttered to herself, organizing the evidence on her investigative whiteboard. Her phone vibrated. It was a text message from an anonymous source. "Look for Project Oasis, Vault 237, First National Bank." On the Harris farm, William and his farming neighbors had established a rotation system with the borrowed equipment. Catherine Wells coordinated the schedules like a military commander, ensuring that each hectare received the necessary attention. "The tomatoes need to be picked by Thursday," William explained to Bob Turner, who was driving a borrowed tractor. "St. Mary's Hospital depends on this delivery for its pediatric ward." Jessica Martinez and Marcus Chen worked tirelessly in the barn converted into a makeshift office. Rachel Henderson, the supervisor of the Department of Agriculture, joined them, bringing more official documents. "We found serious irregularities in Golden Valley's environmental permits," Rachel revealed, spreading maps out on the table. "The condominium was built over a crucial aquifer. The approvals were obtained through falsified technical reports." Marcus adjusted his glasses, studying the maps. "This explains why they are so desperate to control this area. The Harris farm is essential for the natural recharge of the aquifer." A car approached the property, kicking up dust on the road. It was Claire Peterson, wife of the judge who had signed the restraining order against William. Her face showed concern and guilt. "We need to talk," she said, looking nervously over her shoulder. "My husband. He's not a bad man. But Richard Moore has something against him, something that happened in Oregon." Jessica quickly led Claire into the house. The woman was shaking as she pulled more documents out of her purse. Frank signed that order under duress. Moore threatened to expose a miscarriage of justice that could destroy his career. "Diana, who had just arrived with her own findings, began to connect the dots. "The Oasis Project," she muttered. It was a development in Oregon that mysteriously went bankrupt. Dozens of families lost their homes. "And Judge Peterson presided over the case," Claire added. "He didn't know it at the time, but the evidence was manipulated. When he discovered the truth, it was too late." William watched the conversation in silence, his calloused hands clenching a cup of coffee. Years of working the land had taught him that even the hardest soil could be cultivated with patience and the right tools. Rachel Henderson made a quick call. "I'm going to request a full audit of the environmental licenses. With that evidence, we can suspend all Golden Valley operations." "It won't be that simple," Marcus warned. "Moore has powerful connections. We need something more concrete." As if answering his words, Catherine Wells burst through the door, clutching her tablet. "You need to see this. We found something while we were preparing the Northfield for planting." The images showed a series of irregularly buried pipes and valves, clearly installed by the condominium to divert water from the aquifer. "They've been stealing water for months," Catherine explained indignantly. "This is a federal environmental crime," Rachel declared, immediately photographing the evidence with her official cell phone. At that moment, sirens began to sound again. 3 black SUVs from Golden Valley Security were approaching, followed by Richard Moore's Tesla. "They must have found out about the documents," Claire whispered, terrified. William stood up, his expression determined. "Not this time," he said, walking outside. The neighboring farmers, sensing the movement, began to gather, forming a human barrier. Richard Moore got out of his car, accompanied by armed security guards. "This is an official HOA inspection," he announced with his megaphone. "We have information about serious environmental violations." "What a coincidence," Rachel Henderson replied, stepping forward with her badge in hand. "The State Department of Agriculture is also conducting an inspection. And guess what? We found evidence of water theft and falsification of environmental documents." The color drained from Richard's face. His eyes ran quickly to Claire Peterson, who was partially hidden behind Jessica. "You have no idea what you're up against," he threatened, but his voice no longer carried the same confidence. Diana O'Connor was broadcasting everything live on her online news channel. "Local citizens confront corporation over land and water dispute," she reported. "Evidence suggests corruption scheme involving luxury development." William stepped forward, facing Richard. "This land is not for sale. It never has been. And now we know the real reason for your interest." "Your equipment is still in our custody," Richard tried to counter. "About that," Jessica intervened, showing a court notice. "The federal judge has just issued an injunction ordering the immediate return of all confiscated equipment. Apparently, he wasn't too impressed with your tactics." The crowd of farmers began to approach, their determined expressions making clear their willingness to protect the Harris farm at any cost. Richard Moore got into his Tesla, his mask of civility completely shattered. "You've just declared war on the wrong people," he shouted before driving off, leaving his confused security guards behind. "The war was already declared," William replied calmly, watching the car drive away. "You just didn't expect us to fight back." As the sun began to set, illuminating the fields with a golden glow, the group gathered to plan their next steps. The battle was far from over, but for once, they had the tools they needed to win. The First National Bank's archive room was silent when Diana O'Connor, accompanied by a nervous employee, opened safe 237. The contents, a thick folder stamped Project Oasis, confirmed her suspicions. She quickly photographed each page before putting everything back exactly where it belonged. "Oh my God," she whispered, examining the images on her phone as she drove back to the Harris farm. The Oasis project wasn't just a failed venture in Oregon. It was part of an elaborate scheme by Richard Moore to monopolize water resources in several communities in the American West. On the farm, William oversaw the installation of security cameras donated by the community. After Richard Moore's threats, no one wanted to risk another night raid. Catherine Wells organized a group of volunteers who would take turns on surveillance shifts. "We need to talk," Diana announced, entering the barn office where Jessica and Marcus were analyzing documents. Golden Valley isn't just a luxury condominium, it's part of a much larger operation. Rachel Henderson, who had just arrived with reports from the Department of Agriculture, joined the group. Diana projected the photos of the documents onto her laptop. "Moore has been doing this for years," she explained. "He buys strategic land over important aquifers, builds luxury condominiums, and secretly trades the water rights to big corporations." "How come no one noticed this before?" asked William, his calloused hands clenching the back of a chair. "Because he uses a complex network of front companies," Marcus replied, connecting the information. "Each enterprise seems independent, but they're all part of the same scheme." Jessica typed furiously on her laptop. "I've just received an email from Claire Peterson. The judge has decided to testify against Moore. He has evidence of bribery in previous cases." A roar of engines interrupted the conversation. Through the window, they saw a row of trucks approaching. It was William's farm equipment being returned, as ordered by the federal injunction. "At least one victory," William muttered, but his expression remained worried. Years of working the land had taught him that real storms are always preceded by a deceptive calm. His intuition was right. When the last of the equipment was unloaded, an official envelope was delivered into Jessica's hands. It was a subpoena from the State Department of Water Resources. "They are claiming that your irrigation is causing damage to the aquifer," Jessica read, incredulous. "They want to suspend all your farming operations immediately." "Impossible," Rachel interjected. "Our studies show the exact opposite. William's organic farming practices are essential to preserving the aquifer." Diana received an anonymous message on her phone. "Looking for Angela Morrison, former employee of the Department of Water Resources, fired 3 months ago after questioning Golden Valley reports." Catherine Wells, who was watching the whole thing in silence, suddenly spoke up. "Angela Morrison. Isn't she the one who moved to northern Montana after reporting irregularities?" "We need to find her," Marcus declared. "She could be our chance to expose the whole scheme." William looked out of the window, noting his equipment was finally back. "How long do we have before the suspension order takes effect?" 72 hours, Jessica replied. "But I can get a court extension." Rachel Henderson made a quick call. "I have a contact in Montana who can locate Angela Morrison, but we need to act fast. Moore surely already knows we're investigating." Diana organized the evidence on her laptop. "I'm going to publish a series of reports gradually exposing the scheme. If Moore tries anything, the story will already be partially public." A new car approached the farm. It was Claire Peterson again, but this time accompanied by Judge Frank Peterson. The couple looked tense. "Moore is calling a special HOA meeting for tomorrow," Claire informed them. "He plans to vote on the forced annexation of all the agricultural properties in the valley." "He can't do that," Jessica protested. "Technically he can," Frank Peterson explained, "if he can prove that the properties pose a significant environmental risk, and with the forged reports from the Department of Water Resources. Then we have to lay it all out before this meeting," William concluded, his voice carrying an iron determination. The group worked through the night. Diana drafted her report, while Marcus and Jessica prepared a preemptive lawsuit. Rachel coordinated with state authorities to investigate the forged reports. Catherine organized an emergency call for all farmers in the region. "If they want war, let's show our strength," she declared, her cell phone constantly receiving messages of support. At 3 a.m, the first breakthrough, Angela Morrison was located and agreed to testify via video conference. At 4, Rachel received confirmation of serious irregularities in the Golden Valley reports. "Moore is not acting alone," Angela revealed during the video call. "There's a bigger corporation behind it. Blue Desert Holdings. They have plans to privatize all the major aquifers in the American West." William watched the sun rise through the barn window, thinking of his father and grandfather. of how they faced their own battles to preserve that land. Now, the fight wasn't just for the Harris farm. It was for the water, for the future, for the very essence of the community. "The HOA meeting is at 2 in the afternoon, Claire reminded them. "Moore will certainly have his corporate lawyers present." "It doesn't matter," William replied, his voice calm but resolute. "They have money and influence. We have the truth and an entire community on our side." Diana was finalizing her report, scheduled to be published an hour before the meeting. Jessica and Marcus were preparing to present irrefutable evidence of fraud and environmental manipulation. The final battle was approaching, and this time, William Harris and his allies were ready to face it with all the weapons that mattered: truth, justice, and the unwavering strength of a united community. The meeting room at Golden Valley Estates was buzzing with tension when William Harris and his allies entered. Richard Moore, in his usual impeccable suit, chaired the board with a confident smile that would soon dissipate. "Before we begin the vote on annexation," Diana O'Connor stood up, her firm voice echoing through the room. "The Idaho Herald would like to present some relevant information to the HOA members." She projected on the screen a series of documents from Project Oasis, revealing the intricate network of manipulation of water resources. Richard Moore tried to interrupt, but Rachel Henderson from the Department of Agriculture took the floor. "As your state representative, I must inform you that all of Golden Valley Estates' environmental permits are officially suspended, pending federal investigation." A murmur went through the room. Luxury homeowners began to fidget, especially when Angela Morrison appeared on the screen via video conference. "As a former employee of the Department of Water Resources," she declared, "I can confirm that the reports submitted by Mr. Moore were deliberately falsified to cover up the illegal detour of water from the aquifer." William watched in silence as Jessica Martinez presented the legal evidence. Outside, dozens of local farmers gathered in solidarity, their tractors and equipment forming a protective barrier around the building. "What we are witnessing here," Jessica explained, "is a systematic attempt to monopolize essential water resources through fraudulent practices and intimidation." Richard Moore finally lost his composure. "You have no idea of the power you are up against. Blue Desert Holdings will not." "Blue Desert Holdings is under federal investigation," interrupted a man who had just entered the room. "Special Agent David Rodriguez, FBI. Mr. Moore, you are in custody for multiple violations of environmental laws and corporate fraud." Catherine Wells smiled discreetly as she photographed Moore's stunned expression being handcuffed. Claire and Frank Peterson, sitting near the window, exchanged looks of relief. "The documents show that every property in Golden Valley was acquired through the manipulation of records," Marcus Chen explained to the shocked residents. "You too are victims of this scam." William finally stood up, his presence commanding natural respect. "I didn't come here to seek revenge," he declared. "I came to propose a solution that benefits the whole community." Rachel Henderson projected a new set of maps. Harris Farm, along with other farms in the valley, are key to preserving the aquifer. With proper sustainable practices, we can ensure clean water for everyone. Diana continued, "Our investigation revealed that Golden Valley was built without proper environmental safeguards. The choice now is between continuing a destructive conflict or working together to preserve our resources." The residents of the condominium, many of them successful professionals from big cities, began to understand the gravity of the situation. A retired doctor spoke up. "How can we help solve this?" William shared his vision. "A cooperative management plan that would integrate sustainable farming practices with the residential community. The farmers would keep their land, while the condominium would benefit from a truly sustainable environment and local, organic produce. Imagine," he proposed, "your children learning about sustainable agriculture, having access to fresh, organic food, participating in real environmental preservation, not just a label on a sales brochure." Jessica quickly organized an emergency vote. With Richard Moore removed as HOA president, residents elected a new board committed to community cooperation. "This is more than a legal victory," Catherine declared as the farmers celebrated outside. "It's a victory for the future of the valley." In the weeks that followed, the changes were startling. The new HOA board, working together with local farmers, developed guidelines that respected both residential and agricultural needs. Local hospitals continued to receive their organic supplies, and new educational programs began to flourish. William, overseeing the harvest in his restored fields, reflected on his family's legacy. His grandfather had arrived during the Great Depression with only a mule and a plow. His father had kept the farm alive through drought and hardship. Now, he had not only preserved that legacy, but turned it into a model of community cooperation. Diana O'Connor won an investigative journalism award for her series of reports, which inspired similar investigations in other communities affected by Blue Desert Holdings. Rachel Henderson used the case as an example to reshape state water protection policies. One quiet afternoon, as the sun set over the green fields, William found an old photograph of his father in the barn. Next to it, he placed a new one, showing children from the condominium learning about organic farming on his farm. "You were right, Dad," he muttered. "The earth always knows who really loves it." The valley had changed, but its essence remained intact. Farm machinery now worked in harmony with suburban life, and the aquifer, protected by sustainable practices, continued to nourish both crops and people. The story of Harris Farm has become a symbol of resistance and renewal, proving that even in the toughest battles, truth, justice, and the strength of the community can prevail. And in the depths of the fertile land, the crystal-clear waters of the aquifer continued to flow, preserved for future generations.